Hello, and thank you all for joining us again today here on Hessens County for another TTRPG talk. This video series takes a look at tabletop role-playing games and related materials, makes suggestions for some of your own games, and takes a look at some of my own materials. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Peach Garden Games' new game, To Swear on Your Honor. This is a single-player TTRPG of devoted knighthood. Now, I'm going to start off right off on the bat. It says it's a single-player game, but McDonald, the actual writer of our game, actually it does include suggestions where you might be able to potentially play this with a group, whether that be with a game master and a player, your liege and your knight, or potentially with a group, basically a team of knights kind of working together to try to solve problems. Also, just one thing I'd like to point out. I am saying the word knight. Your character is technically playing a knight in the sort of literary sense, not in the actual literal sense. Our character essentially is a person who comes from a culture or society that accepts the idea that sometimes certain people will be sworn into the service of others for whatever reason. Right? So, yes, you could be an actual literal knight. This game was originally designed as a hack for the game of the Friendly Neighborhood Superhero, which was created by Cat Scratcher Games. So basically any sort of type of character where you might imagine a superhero or like a classic knightly style of character, like a paladin, right? So you could have this take place in a sort of historical fiction setting, like let's say Renaissance France, which a lot of these pictures actually really suggest is actually more like sort of that late medieval, early modern sort of Europe, right? So maybe our musketeer serving the crown in France. Maybe you are... I'm blanking on his name, but the one character from Babylon 5, the one Narn who walks around with the sword, who he has to put blood on it before he can put it away, who is like sworn to be like the bodyguard and of Jakar, the Narn ambassador. I'm blanking on his name. Sorry, everybody. But that character could fit this, right? So you could be in any sort of setting you want, any sort of cultural where there's some sort of heroic hero warrior ideal. You could be a Greek hero, and you're sworn to the service of a monarch, or maybe even a god. That's another thing. Our liege does not necessarily need to actually be like a person. Maybe your liege is some sort of spirit or a god or something like that that has power or protection over others. World. Essentially, we need to create a land, a theme, so sort of a setting, right? We need to have a monarch or a liege, basic idea behind who this person is. Obviously, we can build on that during the course of the story. We need to create our knight, which will consist of a backstory, a legend, which we'll talk about in a second, and 4 different stats. These are strength, swiftness, gallantry, and cunning, which correspond to strength is, well, your physical prowess. Swiftness is speed and accuracy. Gallantry is essentially your ability to inspire or motivate others, influence others' emotions, essentially. And cunning, which would be basically any sort of solving of problems through knowledge or creative and a critical problem solving thinking skills. The legend is important because the legend both creates some sort of supernatural power that our heroic warrior has, but also creates a weakness. Here we have an example of 6 different potential legends and how they might influence our strengths and our weaknesses. So, for example, our character is has incredible prowess. You shall never fall as long as your sword is in your hand, right? Or with you, right? But that also potentially comes with drawbacks of, like, maybe our prowess keeps us fighting even when fighting is not necessarily the appropriate thing to do. Guidance. Something guides us through all desperate times, and something allows us to see through deceptions and falsehoods. Maybe that means that we see falsehood in places where we really wish we didn't, right? Or maybe it reveals to us a horrible truth that we wish we didn't know. Those are all different potential drawbacks to legends that could potentially result. Legends, as I mentioned, allow us to potentially utilize a stat called destiny, which allows us to influence, not the destiny you see on the page here, that's different. That allows us to potentially add extra dice to our rolls, which we'll talk about in a second. So that's the basics of that. Well, you need to create that before we can actually start. Once we have started and we have created our knight, we begin to embark on quests. So this is the primary actual story loop of the game. Because this is a single player game, it does focus on journaling a lot. So essentially we are creating a story. And this is going to feel very familiar to people who have read things like the Songs of Roland or the different sorts of these stories about King Arthur and stuff like that. Where we have a set of characters who regularly go through a different series of a weird quests or adventures or whatever, and we just keep going through this cycle again and again. When we are embarking on our quests in our quest loop, what we need to do is we need each of our quest loops basically has two major phases. We have a peril and we have intrigue. A peril is a problem, some danger that is affecting the people, the land of our kingdom. The intrigue is some sort of political machinations that are happening behind in the background. So Cat gives us a whole bunch of rolling tables that we can use to randomly generate or pick to create a peril, which whenever we're creating an intrigue or a peril, what we'll need to do is we need to find the cause and then the problem. When we're dealing with perils, we could potentially have events that are occurring that have a difficulty anywhere from 1 to, I think the highest you can get it to be is like 5. And basically, for each difficulty we have, we need to successfully roll. We need to successfully do a stat roll. And basically kind of role play out and storytell out how we solve the problem. The intrigue also works the same way, except for intrigues. Here, I'll go ahead and jump back here to an intrigue table. Intrigues essentially work the same way, but intrigues always only have a difficulty of 1. So, for example, and also, depending upon what the cause of the intrigue or the peril is, there's a certain stat whenever we're rolling which would make it more difficult. You potentially gain more experience points, but it makes it more difficult to complete. So real quick, I should go ahead and explain exactly what the how you do rolls in this game. This is a D6 dice pool system where you need to have at least one die in your pool be a 5 or a 6. So basically there is a sort of 1/3 chance of success on each individual die. Obviously, the more dice you roll, the greater the chance of success. You roll 1 die for each point you have in the stat you're attempting to use in this particular action. So, for example, if I have a swiftness of 2, I roll 2 dice. If I have a cunning of 4, I roll 4 dice. If I have a strength of 1, I roll 1 die. If the legend that you picked for your character could potentially apply here, then you might add an extra die. So if my strength is 1, but I picked prowess as my legend, then I could potentially roll 2 if I'm like fighting something, right? If I decide to spend a destiny point, I could potentially add an equal number of dice to my destiny to my legend rank plus 1. So, for example, if I have a legend of, I'm rolling 2 dice, right? I decide that's not enough. There's too great of a chance. This is too important. And I have a legend of 1, then I'd roll 2 extra dice. So that would be a total of 4. If I am rolling a stat that is currently being resisted by the situation that I'm dealing with, so for example, if let's say the peril I'm dealing with is a plague, obviously you can't really fight a plague. So using strength is automatically resisted. So if I try to roll a resisted stat, then I could potentially gain extra experience points as a result of doing the thing, but I have to roll a 6 on at least one of my dice instead of a 5 or a 6. So it reduces the range of success. We only get one chance in an attempt to succeed with the intrigue. If we fail to succeed with the intrigue, then that makes the next peril more difficult, because presumably that individual that the intrigue was centered around is affecting our ability to act in the future. As a result of doing all of these things, each time we roll successfully on a peril or an intrigue, we reduce the difficulty by 1. That means, obviously, if we succeed with an intrigue, we automatically defeat it and it's done, or at least we thwart it. Perils will typically take more than one stage unless it's very simple. We gain experience points for each difficulty of peril we faced, which we can spend along with any resisted rolls we might have succeeded on, or we can also gain experience points through other means, which we'll explore some other time, which we then spend on this table here on the page, which allows us to potentially increase a number of our different stats, increase reputation, decrease reputation, so on and so forth. We continue doing that loop until we are satisfied with our story, or one of our reputations has hit 10. So we'll talk about reputations real quick. There are essentially 9 reputations in the base game. Each of our stats essentially has 2 reputations for itself. Strength, for example, has mighty, that you can see on this page right here next to my hand. We have mighty and dangerous, right? So our strength makes us be a beacon of strength and hope, right? A staunch defender, or we are seen as being more dangerous and causing more problems being around than we're solving. Swiftness is attached to, basically would be associated with being trustworthy or clownish. Gallantry would be associated with inspiring or tragic. And cunning would be associated with being masterful or foolhardy. So each of those things could potentially attach to these. Basically, we gain a point of reputation every time we use essentially one of those stats in a roll. So if we fail a lot of rolls with cunning, for example, maybe we look foolhardy. And if our foolhardiness hits 10, then our character retires because they've just had enough. They're exhausted. They've been, or maybe they're incredibly embarrassed and they don't want to face it anymore. Could be lots of different things. Dishonorable is a special reputation that basically applies whenever you gain reputation in this area whenever you choose not to act. So, for example, let's say a peril comes up and it's incredibly difficult peril, and you're like, there's just no way I could do this. And you just basically say, throw up your hands and you say, I can't do this. Then you gain points in your dishonorable reputation. Those are the 9 that are in the base game. There is a 10th one that Cat McDonald does introduce in the sort of optional rules section in the back, which is called wounds. So basically, whenever you fail at facing a peril, you could choose to suffer a wound instead of the reputation you would advance. So maybe you somehow ended up facing a extremely harmful injury that prevented you from acting, right? Or maybe you attempted to do the thing and then you didn't. You failed, but you instead get a wound instead of gaining the sort of negative reputation that's associated with this particular stat. So again, this is not like hit points. This is more like tracking the number of times that you can. This is essentially a track that you can kind of throw things into if you're failing a lot. Eventually, it'll reach the point where, again, once you hit 10, something's happened that you end up dying, or you have to retire because you've just been so physically injured you just can't do it anymore. You could also potentially include into the story that you're writing as through around all of this dice rolls and stuff, talking about how you were outmatched and how you recover from your injury, or what your injury is like, and stuff like that. So that's something else we could do potentially in this section. So thank you all for joining us again today. That was To Swear on Your Honor by Cat McDonald of Peach Garden Games, a single-player TTRPG of Devoted Knighthood. Links to the itch store, of course, can be found in the doobly-doo down below, along with anything else I find relevant, like potentially some potential hack ideas for this that I posted onto Twitter. I might also potentially be doing an actual play of this in a little bit. I need to actually do a full run-through of the game to really see if I feel it would work. But if I do, that might be a return of actual plays to Hessens County, which would be nice. Again, don't forget to check out the game on itch, and don't forget to rate your itch purchases. And have a good time. If you would like to show your support for this channel or for the Hessens County blog, in the description down below you will find links to the channel coffee and also the itch store. Please feel free to take a look, and thank you for your support.